right, guys, Pro Bowl is this weekend, but more importantly, after that, the Super Bowl takes place next week between the Chiefs and the Eagles. The Vikings made the playoffs this year. They had an incredible run during the regular season. We're bounced in the first round. My question for you, and I'm going to steal this straight out of Matthew Coller's mailbag from today. Despite competing this year and winning as many games as they did and being near the top of the NFC as long as they were for this season, do you feel that they are actually in their Super Bowl window with the quarterback questions that they have? How many years away are they from truly competing in this conference based on what you've seen in the playoffs this year with the Eagles dominating the way they have and just playing and balling out the way they have? The Commanders looking like they're going to be a generational team with Jaden Daniels at the helm and looking like they're going to be the class of the NFC for the next several years. How many years away are the Vikings from truly competing in the NFC?
It all depends on how good JJ McCarthy is. I mean, I think that's the simplest and most obvious answer, but it's true. I thought this year, I thought the Vikings were closer during that kind of late season stretch where Darnold was balling out. I thought they were closer to being a Super Bowl contender than they had been since arguably 2009. I remember having that discussion here on the channel of are they better than 2017? And ultimately, it all kind of ended the same way as 2017, where they got blown out and they weren't particularly close. They weren't on even that 2009 level. So now we are assuming that they're going to move on from Sam Darnold, go to JJ McCarthy. And if McCarthy is good as soon as next year, which I think is possible given the way the Vikings have spoken about him and what he did at Michigan, and he was a top 10 draft pick, and he was able to get a ton of really valuable mental reps and do all the VR training and all that stuff over his rookie year, then they could be in the Super Bowl window pretty quickly with what the cap space that they are going to be able to use coming up in 6 weeks here when free agency gets going to build a monster of a roster around him. With that said, I think the more conservative or safer estimate would be maybe we're talking about 2026 as being the year that the Vikings ideally really step into that Super Bowl window, because you never know. There might be some up and downs for JJ McCarthy and what's going to really be his rookie season actually playing. But yeah, it just comes down to if McCarthy hits, because if he hits, that window could open as soon as this year. If he's not very good, then like many other teams, you go back to the drawing board and you're still plenty of years away, even with the talent around him already.
Do you guys trust Jim Harbaugh?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, well, I mean, if you recall, ahead of last year's draft, he said J.J. McCarthy's the best quarterback in the draft. And that turned out to be a pretty damn good quarterback class. The Vikings got him at number 10, and now he has a full year of mastering Kevin O'Connell's offense. So as long as his meniscus heals appropriately and he puts back on the weight that he's lost and he's physically ready to go, and then the Vikings spend $70 million in free agency to bolster the offensive line and fill the holes on defense that they're going to have to fill from departures, there is absolutely no reason to look at the Vikings other than, hey, they basically have the number one pick talent-wise, J.J. McCarthy, in the 2025 NFL draft because he didn't play in 2024. You got the best quarterback in the 2025 rookie class with a all-pro roster that just won 14 regular season games. You're upgrading literally everything and giving a rookie a full year runway. I mean, if Jaden Daniels can do that with the Washington Commanders and the pieces around him, there is no reason the Vikings shouldn't be considered one of the NFC elites, if not one of the NFL elites in 2025, whether it's J.J. McCarthy or even Sam Darnold if they bring him back. Because if they protect Sam Darnold, everybody knows what that arm talent can do. If he's protected, he'll shred you. If he's not protected, you're probably going to lose in a big game. So there's no reason in my mind why this Minnesota Vikings team next season won't be in that championship conversation right off the bat, regardless of who their quarterback is, Darnold or McCarthy.
You guys,
I do think
yeah, go ahead.
I do think Harbaugh is a touch biased on this past year's quarterback class discussion. I think Daniels and maybe even Williams are still maybe Drake May, Bo Nix, whoever. They're still up there, and there's a lot to be sorted out with that class. But I agree with you that McCarthy would be the number one pick in this year's draft over Cam Ward, over Travis Hunter, over Abdul Carter, Shadur Sanders, all these guys. And I was just looking it up, but he is not going to be eligible to win Rookie of the Year, I believe. I think the NFL, you have to be in your first season of pro football. So he can't do the Blake Griffin or Ben Simmons thing and win it in his second year. But I do think he has a very good chance to be the best offensive or defensive first year player this upcoming season, which should be pretty exciting if that pans out.
When you talk about some of these offseason moves that they're going to be able to do this season, or this offseason, with the amount of cap space they have, the limited draft capital that they have, and we can talk about that later on, where do you think their priorities should land in both of those areas? So in free agency, what position should they target there? In the draft, what position should they target there? Are those the same? Are those different with how you view them going into the beginning of the draft process? I know we've still got a couple months till the draft, and there's plenty of information to find out till then or before then, but what positions do you think the Vikings should prioritize in each of those areas, in each of those aspects of the offseason?
The way that I've always looked at it is you use free agency to patch up your holes and address needs, the immediate current needs on your roster. That for the Vikings is on the interior of the offensive line. It is on the interior of the defensive line. It is at cornerback. It is potentially at safety if Cam Bynum leaves and Harrison Smith retires. Maybe you sign a running back, and that could just be bringing back Cam Akers or Aaron Jones or whoever. And then when you get to the draft, ideally you filled as many of those needs as possible so you don't feel inclined to have to address a need with your first round pick. Because I think that's what, for example, the Vikings did in 2019 when they drafted Garrett Bradbury. They felt like they needed a center, and they needed a really good wide zone run blocking center. And I'm not saying that Bradbury was a total reach or anything. He was a consensus first round pick, but that obviously did not really work out. And he's still on the team 5-6 years later, so he's not a total bust. But you get what I'm saying. Like you want to go into the draft with the flexibility to take the best player available within reason. Like the Vikings aren't going to draft a wide receiver or an offensive tackle in the first round this year, probably, or a tight end, because they're set at some positions. But you want to be able to take the best player available at a set number of positions where you still need some help, both currently and in the long term. So I think you got to hammer offensive line, hammer defensive line, hammer secondary in free agency, and then you go into the draft with the luxury to double up on any of those positions, or even take a running back if you want to take Caleb Johnson or somebody like that. And I do think they're going to trade down, which is a separate discussion. But that's how I view the free agency. And it's important that free agency is before the draft, so it lets you do all those things and go into the draft not feeling like you're pigeonholed into, oh, we're taking a defensive tackle here no matter what.
Yeah, I just think you focus the draft on absolutely taking the best player available. You got to remember in the NFL draft that it's not very often that you find a guy in the first round or even sometimes in the second, third, whatever rounds, who's going to step in and be a major contributor right away. We just saw that with Dallas Turner, right? Dallas Turner, I mean, all the measurables were phenomenal with him coming out of Alabama, like 83-inch wingspan. That's like Luka Doncic. It's like, holy God, this dude is a monster. He's the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. He's a pass rushing savant. He didn't do a whole lot in his rookie season, and especially with a complicated defense like Brian Flores schemes up. I mean, it's going to take guys a little bit of time. So if you draft a cornerback or a safety or a defensive lineman, it might take them a little bit of time. I would say that the position that might make an impact right off the bat would be interior defensive line or interior offensive line, because it's kind of like put your foot in the ground, put your hand in the dirt, and go block or go run somebody over and apply pressure, stop the run. It's kind of the meat and potatoes of football where the scheme doesn't, mess with the rookie's head, so to speak. So I would like to see them address those positions in both areas, free agency and the draft. It's kind of like, okay, everybody's talking about the Philadelphia Eagles. Well, they had 1,000 more rushing yards before contact than the Minnesota Vikings had all season. That's crazy, And one thing I also want to make a point of here, guys, is that let's not fall into the trap of believing that everybody's going to go out there and be the Philadelphia Eagles on the ground. There's only one Saquon Barkley. I mean, Kansas City's in the Super Bowl with Isaiah Pacheco, and there's, is that how I say his name? Pacheco?
Isaiah Pacheco
Pacheco,
and Kareem
potato,
Hunt.
potato, whatever. But I mean, we've been talking about this for years where the NFL is a passing league right now. It still is. Don't fall victim to that and start paying running backs all this money because the shelf life is so short. That's why I love the idea of getting a Caleb Johnson or somebody else in the NFL draft and going that direction. I saw Jeremy Fowler talking about Aaron Jones and what it's going to take to get him back next season. Maybe Denver goes after him in free agency because they like the way he plays in his own scheme. And they paid Aaron Jones $7.5 million. Do you really need to do that when injuries are such a concern at that position? I don't think you do. That's why I upgrade on the offensive line, on the defensive line, and you just start beating people up like the Eagles have all season long.
When you look at free agency and which Vikings players are heading into free agency, and we've noted that there's a lot of guys, especially on the defensive side, that are hitting free agency this offseason. Who do you see coming back? Who do you see not coming back? I mean, who is going to leave here and take money to go elsewhere, take big money to go elsewhere? I know Cam Bynum's a names that has been tossed around there. I know we wrote about it yesterday. There was a report that there's conversations between him and the team before free agency of a possible return. Who are the guys that you see not back in purple next year?
Yeah, it's a good plug. I wrote an article. I put a percentage on every single one of them. This was like a week ago. You got to scroll a little bit to find it. But I remember most of them off the top of my head. I think Sam Darnold is probably gone. I think I put him at like 20% to be back, which I don't think it's 0. I don't think it's 10% even. I think it's a possibility. But I think it is rather unlikely, more so than somebody like Benjamin Solak at ESPN seems to think. I think Cam Robinson is almost certainly gone, even though there was, again, a weird thing on ESPN where they're like, a return to Minnesota is not off the table.
Okay.
Like, it is.
Can we talk about him real quick?
It's completely off the table.
Can we talk about that? Did anybody watch the Lions game and the Rams game when he had to face some elite edge rushers and he gave up like 21 pressures in 2 weeks? Did anybody else see that, or was it just me and Will and I don't know about you, Jonathan? I mean, my God, he got absolutely toasted. And they're talking, Jeremy Fowler's ESPN article is like, this guy's probably on a Garrett Bowles Denver-like contract, which is 4 years and $84 million. You're going to pay that guy $20 million a year to be a backup tackle in Minnesota? I mean, no, you're not. He's going to get paid by somebody else, and they're going to have to suffer the consequences against a Jared Verse in the future, unless he's capable of playing guard for less than $15 million a year and you think he can absolutely be a stud, you don't even have that conversation. You say, thank you, Mr. Robinson. We appreciate your time in Minnesota. Good luck in free agency.
Yeah, there's no conversation there to me. He would have to take less than $10 million to play guard for me to be comfortable with that. And he's never played guard before. Like I just think there's a lot better options out there for the Vikings to upgrade at guard. And Robinson, despite the struggles at the end of the season, I think his body of work in Minnesota and obviously the last few years in Jacksonville is still solid enough that he will get 15, 20 million to be a middle half of the league starting left tackle. I think he's gone. I think Byron Murphy Jr. is an interesting one who I think the Vikings are going to make a real effort to try to bring back after the season that he just had in Brian Flores' defense. Pro Bowler, 6 interceptions, good cover guy, ball skills, like well liked in the locker room. It's just a question of, and this is true with literally everyone who enters free agency. It just comes down to price. Like how Murphy's going to get a big raise from what he was making previously. Is he up to making 14, 15 million a year? Is he pushing up towards the top tier of cornerbacks who are making 17, 18, 20-ish million a year? And how much are the Vikings willing to go on that? How do they view him internally beyond just the 6 interceptions? That's 6 plays out of 1,000 all season. Like, well, how do they grade him and view him as an every down player? Do they think that he is an elite type of cornerback and worthy of that payday or not quite? Because maybe he gets an offer from somebody else that the Vikings don't want to match, and then they pivot elsewhere at cornerback. But I do think there's a solid chance that he comes back. I think that's greater than Cam Bynum, who just kind of seems likely to move on. Although I guess there was that report that they could talk about an extension before free agency. So I don't know. There's a lot of fascinating ones. You can go all the way down the list and talk about even like the Trent Sherfields and Johnny Muntz of the world. But as far as some of the big ones, I think Murphy has a decent chance to be back. I think some of the other guys are probably gone.
The cornerback thing is interesting. Minnesota's going to commit money to a cornerback in free agency, almost certainly. Whether it's Steph Gilmore coming back on another one-year deal or Shaq Griffin getting a contract or Byron Murphy Jr. being paid again, they absolutely have to find some bodies there, because if you don't, what are you rolling out next year? Dwight McGlothern and Mekhi Blackman? I mean, who's coming off an ACL? That's tough.
No, they're going to sign at least 2 starting caliber cornerbacks because
I think an elite quarterback in free agency, and then maybe retaining one of the guys on the current roster. So I could see them paying Byron Murphy Jr., $13, $14, $15 million a season. And if they're thinking that, well, we can commit top free agency positional dollars to one guy, then you have a decision to make, because you could go call DJ Reed from the New York Jets, who's in free agency, and say, "Ooh, you're a shutdown corner guy. Are you better than Byron Murphy Jr., who happened to have a great season? Are you gonna pay Murphy after one really good season when the whole body of work says he's not quite that good? Or are you going to go pay a guy like DJ Reed, who's got multiple years of all-pro level cornerback tape on his resume?" I think you go for the DJ Reed in that scenario if they're going to make similar money. And then you go say, hey, Steph Gilmore, maybe come back, play for like $8 million or something like that, one more year. Not a long-term commitment. Shaq Griffin for cheaper than that on a multi-year deal. And then you trust the young guys, McGlothern, who looked good in preseason and training camp, and Blackman, who they were high on before the ACL injury. So that's what I think they'll end up doing there. Top free agency dollars for one guy. And the decision is it Murphy or Reed or somebody else?
There's other guys too. There's Carlton Davis, who had a good year with the Lions. Charvarius Ward had a little bit of a down year, but he was an All-Pro in 2023. That's another article I wrote. So lot of free agent cornerbacks out there. I think they could also go for they love to get the guys in their mid-20s coming off a rookie deal who have some upside, like an Asante Samuel Jr. or Christian Fulton or somebody along those lines. I think they add at least 2 starting caliber corners, one of whom very well might be one of the top 3 or 4 cornerbacks on the market.
Last question of the day for you guys, going back to the Super Bowl conversation to come full circle here. When you look at the 2 teams in the Super Bowl, the Eagles and the Chiefs, what are the lessons the Vikings should take away from those 2 teams, outside of obviously find your Patrick Mahomes? Because that's obvious that every team in the NFL has been trying to do.
You stole the joke I was going to make.
Yeah, since the dawn of time. Skip that one. Take the less obvious ones. What are your lessons that the Vikings should pull away from each of those teams?
The Eagles one, I think, to a degree, is running back and offensive line matter, and having a good running game. I don't know if the Vikings will ever be the Eagles, because that was an all-time rushing season from Saquon Barkley, and that is maybe the best offensive line in football. But there's some real importance to being able to run it effectively, and we've talked about it. The Vikings 30th in EPA per rush in the Kevin O'Connell area out of 32 teams. They just have not been able to figure it out, whoever has been at running back. This year was better with Aaron Jones, but still 22nd in EPA per rush. They got to upgrade that offensive line and then go find a dude at running back. And that's where I really like using a top 100 pick in this draft on a running back, and which is partially why I like the idea of trading down from 24 to get more of those top 100 picks. I think that matters. I think you can really take that from the Eagles to some degree. Also, the Eagles defense has a ton of dudes. They have kind of the build out the whole roster approach, where Jalen Hurts is playing well. He's a very good quarterback when he kind of does what their scheme asks him to do. So it's an interesting battle where the Eagles, it's one of the best rosters of this decade, of this century, maybe. And then you've got the Chiefs, where it's just Patrick Mahomes finding ways to win every week. And They also have some great players elsewhere. I mean, Chris Jones, I think, is another argument to just the impact of a great defensive tackle and that position.
And Jalen
Um,
Carter. Jalen Carter's the
Jalen
same
Carter.
thing.
I
Yeah.
mean, the Eagles, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, they have poured into the defensive tackle position in the draft, and it has made a huge impact for them. So, yeah, I think the Eagles are a little bit easier to try to emulate or learn from than the Chiefs, who just have maybe the greatest quarterback of all time. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the Super Bowl from a football perspective.
Yeah.
The discourse will be obviously annoying with Taylor Swift and refs and all those things, but I'm looking forward to the game on the field.
Yeah, I think it's every great team has some absolute monster on the defensive tackle position. You know, the Aaron Donalds, the Chris Joneses, the Jalen Carters, these guys are freaks. And even the great quarterbacks who can escape pressure, if they've got pressure up the middle and then they have to dodge guys coming off the edge, that's where it's a game changer. I mean, these quarterbacks are so damn good nowadays. When there's pressure coming off either edge, they can spin, they can twirl, they can step up. But if you take the ability to step up away, I mean, game over, baby. That's
what happened
it.
to Darnold against the Rams.
Look at Kirk Cousins against Dexter Lawrence in the playoffs against the Giants. I mean, and that's not a mobile quarterback by any means, but there's a reason we, as a trio here, guys, were drooling about the idea of the Vikings trading for Dexter Lawrence. As unreasonable and unicorn-like as that idea was, I mean, the potential you have when you have an elite pass rushing, penetrating defensive tackle or two is, you know, sky is the limit kind of stuff when you have the rest of the roster to get you where you need to go. That's one of the giant missing pieces in Minnesota, and it has been since the Williams wall. So, you know, time to upgrade there.
Absolutely. Looking forward to all the continued coverage over on Vikings on SI over the next coming months as we lead up to free agency and the draft. Go read our work there, as well as Twins, Timberwolves, and Gophers on SI as well. Good stuff from you guys today. We'll talk to you Monday with another topic across Minnesota sports. Be sure to hit subscribe on the channel. Notifies you every time we post a new video here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Also does help us get found here. Greatly appreciate it.